On behalf of the University of Geneva and the foundations which are supporting the Geneva Centre for Philanthropy, I would like first of all to extend my very warm welcome to all of you who are taking part virtually to this event. The University of Geneva has created the Geneva Centre for Philanthropy some 3 years ago. The center aims to encourage research and academic teaching in philanthropy and to make sure that knowledge is transferred to meet the needs of practitioners, not only in Geneva, but also above the region of Geneva. After only 3 years of existence, the center has already achieved many important results in terms of teaching, in terms of research and knowledge transfer. In terms of teaching, we are proud to offer now not less than 5 different courses covering many fields of our comprehensive university. Among others, we can mention one lecture on the legal implication of philanthropy, another one in the ethics of philanthropy, or a course on neurophilanthropy supported by the Edmond de Rothschild Foundations. In terms of research, we are also very proud to mention the research project financed by the Swiss National Foundation for Scientific Research on the taxation and philanthropy that is closely related to the report which is going to be presented tonight by Mr. Saint-Amans, the Director of the Center for Tax Policy and Administration in OECD. Produced in collaboration with the Geneva Centre for Philanthropy, this report published by the OECD, Taxation and Philanthropy, is the most exhaustive review on the tax treatment of the philanthropic sector undertaken to date. Without any delay, I will give now the floor to Patrick Odier and Maximilien Martin, respectively President and Secretary General of Lombard-Odier Foundation, who are going to present the laureates of the Lombard-Odier Foundation Prize for Academic Research in Philanthropy. Enjoy your evening. Thank you very much for being with us.
Dear Rector Flukiger, dear Professor Henri Peter, dear Max, dear guests, it is an honor and a privilege to be here today to present the first Fondation Lombard-Odier Prize for Academic Excellence in Philanthropy. My name is Patrick Odier. I am the senior partner of Lombard-Odier and the president of the Fondation Lombard-Odier, our corporate foundation. Ever since the creation of our bank, that is in 1796, Lombard-Odier has placed a very high value on philanthropy indeed. Alexandre Lombard, one of our ancestors' partner, for example, was one of the first supporters of the creation of the International Committee for the Red Cross, developed in relationship with a number of private individuals at the time and with whom and which we still have a very tight relationship. Today, we continue that philanthropic tradition in many ways, most notably through Fondation Lombard-Odier focusing on innovative ways to support humanitarian aid and education. In recent years, we at Lombard-Odier have decided to go beyond simple financial support and to actively and contribute to the strengthening of the philanthropic sector itself. Sector strengthening, we believe, should enable all philanthropists, large or small, professional or others, to maximize the impact of their donation and achieve their philanthropic ambition. Having a strong professional philanthropic sector will also help to further solidify trust in philanthropy, and philanthropists will benefit from their reputations as highly respectable actors who legitimately seek to further the public good. Max?
This sector strengthening can take various forms. In 2010, we published a study on the Swiss philanthropic ecosystem and its areas for improvement. And last year, we followed that study with a groundbreaking investigation into the vitality of the philanthropic ecosystem in the cantons of Geneva and Vaud, creating a methodology which can be replicated in other geographic areas to assess the health of the sector. The generation of empirical evidence is crucial to enable governments to set necessary policy conditions and to help foundations and other actors in the sector to make sound decisions regarding their own day-to-day conduct. We also believe that academic study is a crucial driver of progress in philanthropy. For this reason, we became one of the founding partners of the Geneva Centre for Philanthropy, also known for its acronym GCP, in 2017, which we believe is on track to establishing itself as a global leader in this field. The GCP was a key contributor to our study in philanthropic vitality, and the prize allows us to continue to expand our relationship with the stellar team that the GCP has assembled.
The prize that we are awarding for the first time this evening represents another facet of our aim to promote philanthropy. We indeed are trying to incentivize cutting-edge scholarship from senior and junior academics because we believe that we can generate new insights for governments, philanthropists, for foundations, and beneficiaries alike. The topic that we have invited our scholars to address in their papers this year, taxation and philanthropy, is a key point of discussion, as you know, and debate in philanthropic circles and in society more broadly. We have all heard critics dismiss philanthropics as simply making a few donations and gaining tax benefits. Indeed, in recent studies, commissioned in particular in the UK by PRISM, the Gift Fund, to which we contributed, these studies found that the majority of the British respondents hold negative opinions about philanthropies despite viewing philanthropic actions very positively. And some of those respondents cited tax avoidance as a reason for their negative view. But the relationship between taxation and philanthropy is much broader and deeper than that. Tax policy provides philanthropists with important incentives to give and plays a crucial role in structuring how, where, and when donations happen. The fact that the OECD has itself launched a new report on exactly this topic today is a testimony to its importance. The submission we received for the prizes have been judged by a jury comprised of 6 members, including myself, whom I would like to thank, of course, for the time and efforts that they have invested. We were extremely fortunate indeed to be able to create a diverse jury that includes prestigious specialist knowledge in the domain of taxation and tax law, as well as practical experience in philanthropic activities. My fellow members on the jury are, in alphabetical orders, Professor James Andreoni, Professor of Economics at the University of California, San Diego, Professor Yves Flukiger, Rector of the University of Geneva, Professor Sigrid Hemmels, Professor of Tax Law, Erasmus University of Rotterdam, André Hoffmann, a noted philanthropist here in Switzerland, and Professor Kimberly Scharf, Professor of Economics at the University of Birmingham. The submissions we received were generally of an impressively high quality, so we on the jury needed a clear process by which to judge them. We therefore evaluated the submission across 6 criteria listed from the highest to the lowest weights. First, the quality of our arguments. Second, the originality. Third, the significance or the impact of the study. Fourth, the writing style. Fifth, the excellence bonus. And 6, the suitability for an upcoming Routledge publication on taxation and philanthropy. Max?
Part of creating and maintaining a strong philanthropic ecosystem is encouraging the next generation of talented thinkers to devote their time and energy to studying the key issues facing this sector. All sectors need constant infusions of new ideas, new perspectives in order to remain vibrant and healthy. And philanthropy is no different. It is for this reason that the jury decided to award a prize in the category of junior scholar, whereby we seek to offer younger academics a chance to make names for themselves and launch their careers and, of course, contribute to the sector. We have 3 finalists this year. The first is a paper called Aligning Tax Incentives with Motivations for Philanthropy from Brain and Behavior by Joe Cutler, University of Birmingham. Second, Philanthropy as a Self-Taxation Mechanism with Happy Outcomes, Crafting a New Public Discourse by Charles Sellen from Indiana University. And it is now my privilege to announce the first ever winner of the Fondation Lombardia Prize for Academic Excellence in Philanthropy in the category of Junior Scholar, carrying with it a prize of 5,000 Swiss francs. And the joint winners are Karin Honegger, Roman Kanak, Philipp Balziger, all from the University of Applied Sciences and Arts of Western Switzerland, and Alexandre Lambellet from the University of Neuchâtel. For why fiscally encourage philanthropy? The justifications used by political actors in Switzerland between 2000 and 2019. Based on 48 interviews, this paper studies the concrete rationales and frames used by Swiss political actors when making laws relating to philanthropy. It concludes that many different and potentially contradictory rationales exist for supporting philanthropy and provides a much-needed body of empirical evidence upon which to build future studies. And the paper also shows that collaborations of several scholars can help to produce great research. Dear Caroline, can I now ask you to comment briefly on 2 questions and share your insights and passion on this topic over a minute or so? And those are, first of all, what motivated you to conduct research on this topic, you and your fellow researchers, of course, and what are the next steps in this research agenda? Over to you, Caroline.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I'm very happy to be here today, of course, and I am honored. And I would like to thank very much the Fondation Lombardia and the members of the jury for this prize. Our paper is the result of a collaboration between my 3 colleagues at the University of Applied Sciences and Arts of Western Switzerland, Romain Carnac, Philippe Balziger, Alexandre Lambelet, and myself. So you asked us about our motivation. So what we wanted to do was to study the world of Swiss philanthropy using the tools of political sociology. What was concretely motivating us was to learn more about how Swiss politicians concretely think of tax exemptions for philanthropy and to be very empirical. And this allowed us to scratch, if you want so, a little bit at the surface of an overall very positive perception of philanthropy in Switzerland, and to show how diverse, in fact, the political discourse in Switzerland about this topic is. We are, of course, extremely glad that you liked our paper. So thank you very much. It has been a pleasure and a great honor.
Congratulations, Caroline, and a virtual hand. Apart from the others, from us, you get a real hand. And of course, to you, your colleagues, Romain, Philippe Balziger, and Alexandre Lambelet. And I'd like to now hand back to the president of Fondation Lombardia, Patrick Audier, who will tell us more about what happened in the senior category. Patrick.
Thank you very much, Max, and bravo to our junior scholars winners and finalists. Congratulations for your research insight. In the senior scholar category, we also have 3 finalists with a paper entitled Who Gives and Who Gets? Tax Policy and the Long-Run Distribution of Philanthropy in the US by Nicolas Duquette of the University of Southern California and Jennifer Mayo of the University of Michigan. A paper entitled Cross-Border Philanthropy, a US Perspective by Eric Zolt of UCLA Law School. And it is my great pleasure to announce the first ever winner of the Fondation Lombardia Prize for Academic Excellence in Philanthropy in the category of senior scholar, carrying with it a prize of 10,000 Swiss francs. And the winner is Professor Richard Steinberg of Indiana University for his paper entitled The Design of Tax Incentive for Giving. Professor Steinberg's article provides a robust challenge to 4 concepts of conventional wisdom surrounding tax incentives for philanthropy, including the idea that tax deduction provides a greater subsidy to the rich. Congratulations, Professor Steinberg. It is now time to also let our laureate in the senior category to speak for himself. Dear Professor Steinberg, your paper is really thought-provoking and ambitious. Congratulations. Let me ask you in turn, what motivated you to take this deep look at the options to reform the tax treatment of charitable donation, and perhaps to add to it some answers about what next for your research now that you have outlined this agenda? Professor?
Well, I couldn't be happier and more honored than to receive this reward. I'd like to thank the foundation. I won't embarrass myself by trying to pronounce French. And to thank the committee for the hard work, the thankless task of reading all these papers. Frankly, I heard about the call for papers. I wanted a trip to Geneva. It's a lovely country. I wanted to go back to it. I had no paper in mind when I agreed to write this. I had worked on taxes and giving much earlier in my career, figured I could come up with something. And then the trip got canceled and I had to write the paper anyway. And so I totally froze, not knowing what to write. I wrote down every idea I ever had about taxes and giving. and stared at it for a couple of days, and then called my friend, Eleanor Brown, who's a professor of economics at Claremont, at Pomona College, I'm sorry, and said, you know, do I have anything here? And she said, well, these are the interesting things that would make a great paper, critiquing the received wisdom and listing all of the options and the new challenges that come with things like donor-advised funds and hybrid organizations. So that's how I came up with the paper. For future work, well, I got to finish this paper, and most of my work now is on three failures theory and extending it rather than taxes and giving, but it says something about the role of taxes in deciding what activities are assigned to what sectors.
Thank you very much, Professor, and congratulations to you again. Congratulations also once again to our winners in the senior and junior category and to all finalists who submitted papers for consideration. All were of very high quality indeed. It is now time to move to the next part to our program, and for that, I'm delighted to hand the floor to Professor Henri Peter, head of the Geneva Centre for Philanthropy of the University of Geneva.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Odier. Thank you, the Lombardia Foundation. Thank you, Mr. Martin, you're in charge of all Lombardia philanthropic activities. And thank you again to the jury members, and congratulations for the winners. Before we get to the keynote of Mr. Saint-Amans, first two words to put you in context. Shortly after the Geneva Centre for Philanthropy was set up in September 2017, as head of that center, I had to set priorities. I thought that taxes play a key importance in that context. So I prepared with one of my PhDs, Guédré Lédicté-Hubert, an idea, a project that we submitted to the Swiss National Scientific Foundation to try to get some funds to fund an ambitious research project which was supposed to last 4 years. We were lucky and we got it, which enabled me to hire Guédré for that project. Initially, we thought that we would look at Switzerland, but we quickly realized that we should look beyond the boundaries of Switzerland and thought that the OECD was the proper entry point to do that. The way we approached the OECD was through the Swiss ambassador at the OECD in Paris, at that time, Mr. Ulrich Lehner, who very kindly enabled us to meet Pascal Saint-Amans. Pascal, if I may call you Pascal, immediately showed interest, but wanted to see a concept paper. So we went back to Switzerland and we worked hard to prepare a convincing concept paper, which we submitted to Pascal. We did that applying the vision of the Geneva Centre for Philanthropy, which is not only economy and some law, but it's to look at things through a prism, a multidisciplinary prism, including also sociology, psychology, philosophy, and ethics, amongst others. So we went back to Paris, and Pascal was, at least maybe was very polite, but seemed to be convinced that this was making sense, and he showed enthusiasm, and that's the way this project started. We worked hard. I mean, his team, his fantastic team, worked very hard. We tried to help, and this led to this very impressive report, which was released today. So Pascal, thank you. Thanks to your team. You owe our utmost gratitude for what you have been doing, and what you've been doing in very difficult circumstances, because frankly, it was not obvious to meet the deadlines, the ambitious deadlines that we had set to each other to be able to deliver today, but that has been done. Now, we will give you the floor. After your presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. The audience can ask questions online using instructions which will appear on your screen. Pascal, as you know, we all know you in Switzerland and in Geneva in particular, because you are known here as having played a key role in the advancement, let's put it politely, the advancement of the OECD tax transparency agenda in the context of the G20. You graduated at the very well-known National School of Administration, the ENA in Paris. You joined the OECD in 2007, and in 2012, you were appointed to your current position, Director of the OECD Centre for Tax Policy and Administration. The floor is yours. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Henri. Such a pleasure to be with you. Thanks a lot for your very nice words. And more importantly, thanks a lot for the great partnership. You came up with a fantastic idea with some funding, which helped us do what we thought was a very helpful contribution. So I would like to thank the Geneva University, the Geneva Centre for Philanthropy. I would like to say hello to Patrick Audier. You referred the work we did on transparency, and then Patrick Audier was a really great interlocutor from the Swiss Banking Federation at the time. So it's among friends, unfortunately not physically present, that I'm glad to report on the work we've done together on taxation and philanthropy. Personal experience on the work on philanthropy and taxation is, for me, dates back to 2000, the 15th of September, where I was the head of the office in Bercy in the French Ministry of Finance in charge of the taxation of philanthropy. I had just been appointed a few days before, and I had to present the reform to a large crowd of charities. It was in Metz in the eastern part of France. And I personally was not that convinced by the reform, but I did my best. And that was the first boo by 2,000 people at once. So today, not being physically present, I hope I will not have the boos, but I think I took some lessons from that. And that's one of the reasons also why I was so happy to work on this, to try for us at the OECD to provide for the right advice and the balanced advice on what can be done. So our report, done with your support and the support of your team, has allowed us to gather the information, and that's the value added of the OECD. We have members, the information from 40 countries, from OECD countries and beyond OECD countries. And what you will find in the report are findings, benchmarks, best practices, and also trying to become the publication of reference. And this work is not only tax work, it has drawn extensively on the really in-depth work and fascinating work you are doing at the Center for Philanthropy and the University of Geneva on the philosophical approach, sociological approach, and many other multidisciplinary approaches that you bring to the topic. So I will try to present what we've done with two main parts. One, which is the stock-taking exercise, where do we stand today, and the fact that philanthropy plays a very important role, and I would say an increasing role to deliver public goods in an environment, we're in the midst of a pandemic, in an environment where we can see that the implication of civil society relying more heavily on the giving by the people is even more important. And the second part of my presentation will try to present to you what are the takeaways, what can governments or participants to this game take away from our report. So to start with, what we can see, and that's universal, even though it's different from one country to another, is that the economic contribution of philanthropy is very significant. We're not talking about the margins here. We're talking about a contribution to GDP, which is around 5% on average. 5% of the worldwide GDP is something extremely significant. Of course, there are variations which depend on the culture, the respective culture of countries, which depend on the level of social coverage and other welfare states. Now, if you look at the US, where the ratio of tax on GDP is below the OECD average, and one may explain the other, the amount of money directed to charities is big. It's 1.2 trillion, $1,200 billion in 2019. So something extremely significant and part of the culture. So economic contribution is very important, and the tax dimension is absolutely key everywhere. And the tax dimension is twofold. One is the tax regime of the entities, the charities, which will deploy the services or the providing of the goods, the public goods. So tax concessions to the entities on the one hand, and tax incentives to donors on the other hand, individuals as well as corporate. This has resulted in an increase of philanthropic activities over years in areas recognized by governments. And here we have seen over the past 20, 30 years the increased pressure on the budget of many governments, which has translated in fewer funds provided to the charities by the government. So subsidies have reduced, which has obliged the charities to go fundraising a bit more, and therefore more heavily rely on the generosity of the public, which had to be incentivized by tax breaks or tax incentives on the one hand, and on the other hand, to fund themselves. The charities very often have had to deploy commercial activities which have also contributed to the funding of the activities. And doing so, the lines between what is public good and what is more competitive actions, competition and commercial activities, the lines have been a bit blurred, which have made the issue of the taxation of charities and the incentives to donors both more sensitive and more complicated, with at stake a democratic question. You would think that public goods have to be funded by governments through the taxes they collect, and it's for the people represented by parliament to decide where the expenses, the public expenditure, should be directed to. What are the social goals? What are the ultimate goals of a society? That's for the democracy to decide upon. But at the same time, and it's not only due to the overall, lack of trust in the institutions that probably today is at a peak. It's not only because of this lack of trust, but also because the civil society, the people, they care about activities which are activities within the frame of public good, which may not be the top priority of the government, but it would be a waste, literally speaking, not to direct fundings to these activities, which do reflect the views of the people through other mechanism than just representation through the parliament. So you have different tensions there, civil society versus representative democracy. You have the issue of leveling the playing field as regards commercial activities, as I mentioned. It's a very simple example that can illustrate this issue. You go to a fantastic museum and then you will have lunch at the restaurant of the museum. It's a commercial activity. Should I be invoiced VAT or not? Should the restaurant part of the activity of the museum be subject to corporate income tax, or should it be exempt? And depending on whether you are the brasserie across the corner or not, your point of view might differ, and that's a real question. Finally, and I wouldn't would like to spend too much time on that, but it's an important issue. Given the level of inequalities in today's world, there is a risk of an overweight of high net worth individual in an increasingly unequal world, overweight in where the funds are distributed, are allocated. You may have cases where some individuals have been able to build big fortune, and they are usually extremely generous and want to spend in public goods. But the question here is the personal dimension may actually be a bit distortive or may raise questions, especially when the frontier of what public good is and what is not is at stake. We all have a few elements in mind. Being a French person, of course, I have culture in mind, and then some big investments by French billionaires in culture, where some people may wonder, well, where should we draw the line? So there is a question mark there that we shouldn't ignore, even though this should not overshadow the importance of the sector and the fact that governments actually need philanthropy to support them in deploying public goods. So that's for the background of the report. Then the report goes through the presentation of the regimes in the 40 countries I mentioned and tries to find the commonalities of these all. But what I would like to emphasize now is rather the takeaways for the governments and other stakeholders. So the main question, I think, is how to design tax rules which support philanthropy in a manner which is aligned with public interest, because that's the goal. Public interest is to be defined by the government. It's not for private individuals to substitute for the governments or the representatives to decide what public interest is. But then once you fix that frame, how can you design tax rules which will be the most efficient, knowing that there are trade-offs and trade-offs between the cost for the government and the efficiency of directing new funding to a number of activities. So how do you strike the right balance there? So 6 main points there. The first one is that you need to reassess the activities eligible for support. And here we can see very different approaches from one country to another on whether you have registries, whether you have lists of activities, or whether you have more generic definitions. But I think if a government would like to revisit this issue because there would be tensions or there would be a need to be more efficient, then the government should start reassess what are the activities eligible for support, making them in line with the overall objectives of the country without being too restrictive. It's not about just duplicating what the government is already doing, but being able precisely to fund niche which otherwise would not be funded, as long as these niche are within the overall framework of what the public good is considered to be in the country. And of course, the definition will vary from one country to another. So there is no common rule, no harmonization, no global harmonization to do there, but rather the principle of subsidiarity. Each country should, of course, decide on that. Two, the question of what is the most efficient together with what is the fairer. And that's the trade-off you need to have in mind in the design of the tax concession to the donors. So here you have two main tax techniques. One is the tax deduction and one is the tax credit. The problem we see, we have seen when doing this report with the tax deductions is that they can actually be disproportionately beneficial to high income earners. Now, it's good that high income earners give because they can give more. But if the tax benefit is disproportionately beneficial to them, then you have a question of fairness. So the recommendation that you can find in the report, which is to combine efficiency and fairness, meaning that you don't want to lose giving to philanthropy, but you don't want to give too much of an advantage to some category of the population, the high income earners. A tax credit with a cap seems to be the right thing. It's proportional, but it's capped, and therefore would combine both objectives. The third takeaway is about reassessing the extent of the tax exemptions for commercial income of philanthropic entities. That may sound a bit trivial or secondary, but it is not. I'm coming back to my conference back in 1998, actually, that was the date, where the whole sector was extremely nervous because they would be deprived of some tax exemptions. But the reason why the French government at that time moved was because the traditional commercial activities were complaining to see non-for-profit organization, that's the French word for that, les organismes non lucratifs, if we can speak French for 1 second, to venture in commercial activities and therefore distort competition. And this distortion of competition is good for no one and therefore should be avoided. That said, where do you draw the line? And that's a very fine line to draw, extremely delicate, extremely difficult. If you take the example, to be concrete, of the small sport club around the corner, which will do one event every year where they will sell some beers and some food, you would, of course, not tax them, even though it's kind of selling food like a restaurant. But if I use the other example of the permanent restaurant in a museum, which becomes, the place to be, you have a real question of competition. So what can you do there? We have a set of recommendations which are fine-tuning and therefore not easy to summarize. But if I have to take 2 or 3 main points there, I would say as regards VAT, probably not smart to do exemptions. And by the way, VAT exemptions are not necessarily beneficial to not-for-profit organizations because that deprive them for the deduction of VAT. So you need to be careful there. 2, you need to, I think, make the link between the income and whether it's related or not to the entity's worthy purpose, which may help draw the line. Finally, in order to avoid bothering small charities when they do 1 or 2 events, you should put thresholds, a number of events or a threshold of turnover, which would give them all the tranquility that they need just to concentrate on getting some funding for their activities, which will not be too distortive. The fourth element, fourth takeaway, is about reducing complexity. Tax and complex have more than X in common, right? Very often tax will come together with complexity. Complexity in the design of the rule, complexity in the implementation of the rules, and precisely philanthropy, because they need to spend their resource on other things than compliance, must benefit from as much simplicity as possible. Thresholds to eliminate a very significant part, which is, you know, what communities have in common. I mean, local communities with a sport club or whatever association that they could have, that's below the threshold, and that should not be part of any difficulty. Reducing complexity in terms of procedures when you're above the thresholds. And finally, and we recommend that for countries to consider facilitating payroll giving schemes. There are a few countries where, you know, you tick box with your employer, and part of your payroll, your salary, will go directly to some NGOs or charities, is something which can facilitate tremendously the treatment. Fifth takeaway, which is very important, is improving the oversight of tax concessions. I mean, tax concessions are a way to spend public money, whether it's a tax credit, a tax exemption. That's what we tax people call a tax expenditure. So it's taxpayers' money, one way or another, which is redirected. And we need always to be very careful that taxpayers' money is properly used, that it's not abused, and that it doesn't benefit entities which should not benefit them, with a very, very marginal risk, but which needs to be also mentioned, of some criminals using charities as a way to disguise criminal activities. And you even have the FATF, I think it was a joint work with us at the OECD, identifying some typologies of the abuse of charities, which is something that governments must be absolutely sharp on. So how do you improve the oversight of the tax concessions? A few best practices there. One is by increased transparency of the entities themselves. Public registers is an idea that may be too French. You know, the French love public registers, but not only. And having public registers may improve not only the oversight, but also the transparency. Annual reporting I mean, should go without saying. An entity should not benefit any tax break or any tax concession if it does not do an annual report, but that's something that tax administrations should check precisely to avoid the abuses. Combined oversight is probably a best practice. It's not for the taxman or the taxwoman to decide whether an entity is delivering its services in line with the overall public objective. It's more for the ministry in charge of monitoring the area at stake more than the taxman. And as a result, joint combined oversight is probably a best practice. Finally, you need to put a number of safeguards, and I would like to highlight two of them. One is to properly delineate what is sponsoring and what is donating. Not the same. Sponsoring is kind of advertisement. There is an immediate return for the sponsor, right? The name of which will be displayed, and it's tax deductible, and it's a normal regime. You may give an incentive for that. Donating is something different, even though there is some interesting philosophical aspect of why do you give? Don't you give, after all, a bit for yourself or to yourself to have the moral reward of being generous? But still, donating is for free. I mean, that's giving up cash or goods for free, and the tax regime consequently should be different. The second safeguard that I wanted to emphasize, but you will find a couple of others in the report, is that transparency, not only from the entities, but from the governments to the public, is very important. And here I'm talking about tax expenditure publishing. So governments should measure the cost of this tax expenditure, the concession on the one hand to the entities, and the tax breaks for the donors on the other hand. And they should see what the amount is and make it public, because that's a way to track whether the policy is right or not. The last one, and I will conclude with that, is to reassess, the last takeaway, reassess restrictions imposed on cross-border philanthropic activities. I mean, after all, we are the OECD, we are in favor of multilateralism, we are in favor of cross-border investments, we're in favor of cross-border donating, we are in favor of a better cooperation between tax administrations. And of course, most of the causes which would justify philanthropic activities are global causes. I mean, environment, that's global, isn't it? And there should be kind of a global approach to that. Poverty, unfortunately, is also a global issue. Pandemic and addressing poverty in developing countries, I mean, should not be limited to the people in the developing countries, but precisely from developed countries. The pandemic we're going through and the research in health is obviously a global cause. I could name several others, and therefore we need a global approach. Of course, it's not easy for a country to decide to give a tax break for a donation to an activity which will be deployed in another country. You always have the suspicion of sovereign countries, and I'm speaking here in Switzerland, which is probably the country the most attached to the concept of tax sovereignty in the world, but not the only one, to say, why would I give a tax break for something I cannot check elsewhere? So for this, we think that the conditions for a more generous tax regime, which would take into account cross-border donation, the conditions are met. Why? Because for the past 10 years, the international tax framework has changed from local sovereignties having no relationship with other local sovereignties, with no international tax cooperation, to now a global tax community. We have a global forum on transparency and exchange of information for tax purposes with 161 members. We have an inclusive framework for tax, international corporate income tax of 137 members. All these countries work together. All these countries have now legal instruments to exchange information, and not only bank information from the extremely competent Swiss banks to the rest of the world. And I just have to congratulate what Switzerland did over the years. But this can be also done not with this stick approach or taste, but rather in a very generous manner. You can more easily give tax break because you will be able to get the information from other countries on how this money is spent. We have built this coordination, which should allow us to move to a more global approach where countries share common goals and where generosity can be better rewarded or better facilitated to increase the funds moving into that direction, knowing that these funds, of course, must be in line with the public choices of a country as reflected by its government and its representatives in parliament. So to stop here, I think I've exhausted my time. Just wanted to thank Henri and his team, the Center for Philanthropy, all the sponsors and donors maybe, who facilitated this survey. Thank my team. I think Henri did it very nicely, but they were very excited, and I think they did a good job with your support. And you know what? Even though we don't have immediate plans to continue that work, I'm pretty sure that this is the start of probably a longer term project. At least I hope so. And be sure that the OECD will be very happy to continue the reflection and the work into that area. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Pascal. Thank you for everything you did with your team again, and thank you for this outstanding presentation. What you say carries a lot of weight. We all know that because the OECD is not only a trend setter, but a benchmark setter. So we think that your report will be a benchmark in what should be done and looked at by governance. And the fact that 40 countries took part means a lot. Now, maybe before we get into a few questions, we got questions here, several questions. First one is, what are the deliverables? What you have a report, what else can people look at?
Sorry, I couldn't hear the last part of your question. If you
I'm sorry, you delivered a report. Anything else that people could look at?
Okay, well, actually, not much. We have the report, which is, I mean, pretty lengthy. So I wish you a good reading of it. And you will find, I think, a pretty unique source of information for this. And I checked, but I'm not sure that there is any other similar report. So it's a precedent, and I hope it will be a reference. And the report, I mean, may index some references here or there at some other publications, but not much. Now, if you don't want to read the whole report, there is a fantastic blog that Henri and myself published, are publishing now to accompany this. And we did a short summary. So depending on the public, you have a summary of the report, you have a blog to have the main messages, or you have the report itself. And in the report, you have a description for each of the 40 countries, because we proceeded through questionnaires that we sent to the countries, and they responded. So you will find detailed responses, which may give you some better ideas of the tax regimes in the countries which have responded to the question, which go beyond OECD countries, by the way. And
there's a policy paper, isn't it, which is a synthesis of the report for busy people. 10 pages, 12 pages, which is available already. Thank you, Pascal. Now, maybe if you were to suggest 3 points which one and countries should look at as a matter of priority, what would you mention?
I mean, in line with what I've tried to explain, I would say that assessing the consistency of the policy with the other policy goals of the country is something important, so that a government, a country doesn't end up providing massive assistance to a sector which would not be considered as worthy or in line with the objectives. And that's where, you know, the idea of measuring the tax expenditure is important. It's a question of accountability of governments and relevance of the legislation. 2, of course, carefully design the delineation of the preferential tax regimes. You cannot go by providing a tax exemption like this. You need to look into the details, or you will have problems. I mean, if you decide to exempt all the income by entities because they are a charity, even if the charity is in line with the policy objective, you'll have problems with the competitors. And these problems will be, I mean, pretty nasty, because they translate into the, you know, the day-to-day life. And that's where you make people very unhappy with the system, as they call it. And you need to be very careful in the design there. You asked for 3 pieces of advice. So the third one would be about combining, I mean, reducing the complexity on the one hand and improving the oversight on the other hand. And that's not easy. So these are two contradictory objectives, and that's where you need to find the balance. Reducing complexity is obvious, in particular for the small ones, and for the bigger ones, where the tax expenditure is likely to be significant, you need a good oversight, which should not be too intrusive, but should be combined between the relevant ministries and the tax administration.
Thank you. Guilherme.
We have a question coming from Brazil. Is there any global research on the size of philanthropy in each country economy and how much tax incentives play part in it?
So the answer to my knowledge is no. You may have more or less transparency from one country to another, but global, that's the word I heard from the question. No, there is no global research. Maybe this question is a fantastic one for our next project, which would be to try to evaluate for all countries and then do the benchmark. But no, there is no such thing, which is interesting. We're talking about 5% of the world GDP, as I mentioned in the introduction, and the level of knowledge is actually pretty small, pretty limited. It's an area where people are not necessarily clear. It was interesting, by the way, when we circulated the questionnaires, our own interlocutors, who are tax officials from the government, had to do serious research. And doing the research, they sometimes realized that the regimes were all but clear. So you can see that better understanding what's going on may be the first step to take.
Thank you. Another question. The report highlights a series of recommendations and points to which the countries should pay attention. Do you believe that one size fits all, or that each country may opt for a different solution?
So clearly, no one size fits all. Okay, each country has its own tax system, and we always need to keep in mind that a tax system comes second. It comes after the social choice of a country. Each country decides what its social model is. The tax system comes second to fund a social model. And social models are extremely different. If you take OECD countries, which are more or less comparable, you will have a ratio of tax on GDP varying from 17% in Chile to probably close to 48 or 49% to the world champions, which are the French on tax, as always, right? So the public choices are not the same, and therefore the policies cannot the same. There are common goals, though, I think, which are about increasing the level of giving while limiting the fiscal cost and managing the distributional and democratic impact. So these are common constraints on the design of the policies, but the policies may vary from one country to another depending on what are the areas which need more funding or funding coming spontaneously from the population rather than transiting from the tax system. It depends on the social and healthcare system of the country, the welfare state. Depending on the level of welfare state, you will direct or not funds to these activities. So no size fits all. What is common, though, is filling the gaps.
Thank you, Pascal. Now, it seems that it would make sense to pursue the conversation. Do you think that the OECD could play a role, and if so, how?
Well, I would like to return the question to you because you've taken the lead on these issues of philanthropy, and we would be happy to assist there. So yes, I think there is more work to do. One, because the level of knowledge is still limited. So you can see that, I mean, data findings is something which we could do to have more granular benchmark for countries also to be more alert to the issues. We could organize more of a conversation between countries for them to exchange on the best practices. also for them to see what mechanisms could be in place to facilitate the cross-border mechanisms to facilitate donation. Also, we have that, but the risks, because it's by fighting the risks of abuse and so that you secure the 90% of the safe activities. So there are many areas where I think we could do further work. The team was fascinated by this exercise, so was I, but the member countries, we have a working party of tax policymakers, and I think they did react pretty well when we sent them another questionnaire, because, you know, the way we work at the OECD when we start examining a new area is we send a questionnaire. Now, if you're the tax person in an administration, you may sometimes be tired by, oh, another 40-page long questionnaire from the OECD. I might pet to respond to the OECD. And then the level of response was pretty high, and the level of interest too. So yeah, I think there is room. And if I may add one last point there, you know, the OECD is made of 37 member countries, Switzerland being one of these members, of course. But actually on tax, we've been able to grow, to become probably much more relevant than just the OECD membership, which represent 55% of the worldwide GDP. We have now, I mentioned the numbers, 161 countries in a body, 137 countries in another body, and all these countries are ready to work together on both best practices, exchange of information, and also reflection on the design of policies. So I think we should take advantage of this more global membership to work on this. I'm pretty sure that developing countries, of course, have another perspective on these issues, because first they are, I mean, the recipient of funds, of assistance, of donations, but also because they may face some issues of inequalities within the country. So you have interesting perspectives there that we should take into account.
Thank you, Pascal. So it's really, again, a confirmation that it's to do that needs to act as partners between countries. You and us, we can bring a little part, but you are key if we were to pursue the exercise. Now, maybe one point before Deirdre comes with other questions, because we have many questions coming in, but you mentioned the need to get access to data, therefore to transparency. Would you say that transparency is a key driver if that sector is willing to build trust, and trust seems, as you said, to be necessary in this field?
I would think so, and it's both ways. It's a two-way street. Transparency is from the charities because they benefit taxpayers' money, and therefore they have to be accountable for that. Let's not forget the key principles of democracy. And consent to tax includes a right to know how tax is spent, and that's why people have representatives in parliament. I mean, it comes from all that. So transparency from them, but also transparency from the governments on how they spend the money. So the recipients, but also the one providing the break. So I think this transparency is necessary, one, to assess the policies, for democracy to be properly exercised, and also to avoid, I mean, the risks of abuses or the risk of misuse. The problem very often when you don't have the proper monitoring is that things will never be watched, they will never be monitored, and they become so wrong at some point that you have a scandal. You have people waking up and say, but that's wrong, we're doing the wrong thing. And then you have a damage to the whole sector, which is extremely unfair. So the transparency is a way to secure a smooth running of all this. Yeah.
Now we have a question from Geneva. Now that fiscal reflation is called for to kickstart the world economy post-COVID-19, do you see changes in taxation rules to incentivize more donations?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer. You could have, I mean, the question could be formulated on the exactly opposite manner, to say, given the deficits, given the need for governments to pay the debt back? Won't they be more restrictive on the tax breaks they will provide to sectors that they may not consider as urgent as others would think they are? So it could go both ways. The way not to respond the question, because I'm also good at not responding questions, would be to say the OECD recommendation to governments right now is don't rush to fiscal consolidation. We have been through, and we still are through, the worst crisis for probably more than a decade. I mean, we thought that 2008 was the worst since 1929. We may actually, I mean, beat the record here. So it's really bad. We're still in the crisis, and it's very important that governments don't rush to fiscal consolidation. Now, would we extend that and say, well, don't rush to fiscal consolidation and give tax concessions to everyone, or broader tax concession? I'm not sure we would move into that direction either. So no, targeted assistance. I mean, probably there will be questions on health and the healthcare system. Is it good enough? Is it well-funded enough? Shouldn't government facilitate the funding of that sector? Probably this issue will be more critical in many countries, with maybe some moves. But no, I think that no status quo, but no big policy change there is what we should probably expect.
Thank you. And another question. Have you identified some countries which you would consider quite exemplary in their practices?
I must say that I should ask the team there. Unfortunately, I mean, I'm their speaker today, so I don't have the granular approach that they may have. But no, I mean, we don't have a conclusion from the report saying, oh, look, here is the poster child of philanthropy. This is the right thing to do. Clearly, the US is the country where you have the most and where philanthropy is the largest, but it's not because of tax. Or maybe paradoxically, it's because tax is rather low in the US, or the weight of tax on GDP is very low, because it's a society which probably calls for more private actions based on the freedom of the people, and tax being considered as an infringement of the freedom. So you may have that dimension playing fully in the US. But no, I'm not sure there is one poster child. There are more or less good regimes here or there. And that's where probably we should continue the work and be more granular in the description, because the devil, of course, as everywhere else, is in the details there. I mentioned the exemption of commercial activities sounds, or the issue of the tax treatment of commercial activities of charities and philanthropic entities. It's an extremely delicate thing to design, because it depends on the legal environment. It depends on the economic environment of the country. We did work not long ago with Colombia on that. And Colombia, I mean, that was a complete mess, and we had to clean it, I mean, to help Colombia clean it up. Now maybe they have a good regime. I hope so. I hope our advice was good, but no, I think you will find different elements more or less good in different countries. No poster child.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pascal. And what comes out of our research program here is the same thing. So there's been no, in general, in any country, in-depth research, from scratch as to how to build up the ideal system. So it's more an opportunistic approach, which has developed somehow. So maybe that what you've been providing now will show you and lead people to think more systematically and try to modelize what could be the best solution, even though, as you said, there is no ideal solution which would fit all. We have many questions. Let me take one which is interesting. Having heard that you suggest to have a cap, so the question is, wouldn't it be more efficient to allow for unlimited deductions, but to allow the government to have a say on the use of the money above a certain threshold? Now, It's a funny question. Does it make sense? What do you say?
I'm not sure I'm the best place to respond to that question, but no, I don't think that's the idea. The idea is not for the government to substitute and decide that above a certain level, the government will decide how to allocate the fund. That's precisely contrary to the idea of philanthropy. Or to put it otherwise, it has a name. If government decides how to allocate the fund, it's a tax. That would be a voluntary tax. There is no such thing as a voluntary tax. So if you think that beyond a certain level, it's the government which has to decide how to allocate the fund, make it a tax, which means that you don't deduct. So the idea that you would deduct up to a certain level and beyond the level, it's the government which decides the allocation is a bit a contradiction in its own terms.
Absolutely. And now another one, which is, why do you say that the definition of public good is an exclusive government task? This is a common effort in which civil society has a very important role. So is it an exclusive task of governments?
That's a very good question, and it's a philosophical question. When it is about public policies, like providing exemptions, which means using taxpayers' money, because a public expenditure, even a tax expenditure is a way to use taxpayers' money, even though you don't have cash coming out of the coffers of the government. When it's about public policies, it is for the government's large meaning. I'm not talking about the executive branch, I'm talking about the state institutions, so the government and the parliament, to decide. Now, they have to decide this. Now, civil society, of course, has to reach an understanding and probably influence what the understanding of a public good is. So I think we should not confuse who has to decide institutionally what is eligible, and that's the public institutions, because it's about the laws, and who shapes the common understanding of public goods. Of course, it's not for the government to decide in terms of understanding what the society should look like. It should reflect the people, but that's the whole issue of democracy, of representativity. So you need to find both ways, thus the very important role that NGOs, civil society have to play in the shaping of the common understanding, in the lobbying of governments and decision makers on how to allocate the fund, but at the end of the day, it's for the representatives of the people to decide.
Thank you. Jedre.
One more question coming from South Africa. In general, how successful are tax incentives to encourage philanthropy in case of companies, so for corporate philanthropists? Have you been able to study this subject? Or do you have any results?
We haven't got into, I think, enough details to provide a response to this question. There are different regimes. There is also sponsorship versus pure donation. So no, I'm not able to respond to that. That's a very good question. I'm not able to provide the right answer. Or if I may, I mean, unfortunately, companies have too many other opportunities to reduce their tax burden than looking at philanthropy first. So the main task currently I'm engaged on is how we fix international tax rules so that the profits of multinational companies don't shift too easily to tax havens, but stay in the countries where they should be. So it's marginal. I don't have the answer, but definitely it's a marginal question.
Pascal, thank you. Because of the time we allocated ourselves, we have many other questions. Unfortunately, they will be asked on another occasion, or anyone can contact us. Our rector will close. Thank you a lot, Pascal.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pascal. It was really a wonderful conference. I think it was a perfect illustration of what we would like to do at this Geneva Centre for Philanthropy. First of all, it's a center for multidisciplinary approach of philanthropy. It's a center devoted also to research. It's a center devoted also to having a global view on what is philanthropy today, and also a center which needs to work with international organizations. So I'm not going to be very long, but just I would like to thank very much all the team who worked very hard today to prepare this conference. I would like also to thank very much the Foundation Lombardia for the first prize in philanthropy. And please join us at the website of the Geneva Centre for Philanthropy. You will find all the research which is done there, the courses which is given here in Geneva, and the links with the question for society and research and education. So thank you very much, all of you. Stay healthy, as we say, and hope to see you very soon again. There were many people from all over the world. We lost the physical contact with you, but we gain in terms of impact, having the capacity to, in fact, having an impact on all over the world, people coming from South Africa, from Australia, from Canada, from US, and from Europe, and from Geneva. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night.